I'm John Heilemann.
And I'm Mark Halperin. And with all due respect to Donald Trump, who started calling Senator Sanders Crazy Bernie, I think that nickname's already taken.
Crazy Donald.
On the show tonight, Donald Trump's data shrug and Hillary Clinton's email bug. But first, Paul Ryan's dilemma: to hug or not to hug. It's only Wednesday, but anticipation here in Washington's already building for Trump's big Capitol Hill peace summit with Republican lawmakers tomorrow. The GOP presumptive nominee's got a series of meetings scheduled, but much of the focus is going to be on Trump's tete-a-tete with House Speaker Paul Ryan, who has very publicly withheld his support from Trump so far. The tension between these two top Republicans has been toned down in recent days somewhat, but in a story published by the New York Times today, Trump was defiant in an interview about the leverage he has walking into their meeting tomorrow morning, saying the support of his 8 million Twitter followers mattered more to him than Ryan's blessing. And in a pregame Capitol Hill press conference today, Ryan was a little more conciliatory, saying he wanted to find common ground with his party's presumptive nominee.
To pretend we're unified without actually unifying, then we go into the fall at half strength. This election's too important to go into an election at half strength. That means we need a real unification of our party, which, look, after a tough primary, that's going to take some effort. We are committed to putting that effort in. I want to be a part of that unifying process so that we're at full strength this fall so that we can win this election. This is a big tent party. There is plenty of room for different policy disputes in this party. We come from different wings of the party. The goal here is to unify the various wings of the party around common principles so we can go forward unified.
All right, so obviously, John, no matter how well the meetings go tomorrow, Trump and Ryan are still going to have their differences. But what are the areas you think they can come out together tomorrow and show a unified front after these meetings?
Well, Mark, I think they can probably unify around the common goal of beating Hillary Clinton and keeping the Democrats out of the White House. Let me see. What else? On policy, if you believe where Donald Trump is now, Ryan and Trump have a lot in common on social policy and on some cultural policy, not on immigration, obviously. They might have some common ground on some foreign policy. But when it comes to fiscal policy and economic policy and shrinking the role of government and all the stuff that has been at the core of Ryan's ideological and policy agenda, I don't see a lot of overlap.
I agree. The main thing is they can come out and say we must do everything we can to beat Hillary Clinton, to get Republicans elected and reelected around the country, and to raise money for Republicans. I think that the fact is the main thing they can agree on tomorrow is to come out saying things move forward, they're working together. And I think that's where it'll end. I don't think it's ever going to be easy for Ryan to endorse Trump in a full-throated way. But I think if Trump can convince Ryan that he can win, and the recent polling, however limited it is, that shows Trump with a chance to win, I think that's going to put more pressure on Ryan than he's faced to endorse. And you're seeing a lot more Republican members of Congress saying, look, this is our nominee, deal with it. Right. All right. All the controversy that's been swirling about Donald Trump's unreleased tax returns has swirled even more in the last 24 hours since the AP did an interview with Trump published yesterday in which he said he doesn't expect to release his tax returns before the November election. Then Mitt Romney took to Facebook and again called on Trump to release his tax returns, warning the nation that, quote, there is a bombshell in there. Late this afternoon, Trump used his preferred social media megaphone, Twitter, and said, quote, in an interview I told at AP that my taxes are under routine audit and I will release my tax returns when audit is complete, not after election. There's an exclamation point there for those of you on the radio. John, will Trump pay a price if he doesn't release his tax returns before Election Day?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question, but I can tell you one thing. I can tell you two things. One thing is that the Clinton campaign is going to try really hard to make Donald Trump pay a price for not releasing his tax returns if he doesn't do that. And the other is that it's our job, your job, my job, our job in the press to make sure that Trump does pay a price if he maintains this stance. It's ridiculous and obscene that he could ever suggest the idea, given the history, the precedent here, that he would not have something close to full financial disclosure for the voters to determine what is in there. And we all need to keep the pressure on him because this really is something that matters a lot.
There is a rule in Washington and in politics. When something is famous for not being released, eventually the person who's not releasing it must relent and release it. Donald Trump's tax returns are about to get very, very famous. He can say all he wants. It has to do with the audit, but the pressure is going to be unrelenting. I will say this on this matter. The conventional wisdom has been, if the Republican critics of Romney and the Democratic critics of Romney agreed in criticizing him on some point in exactly the same way, that puts a lot of pressure on him. So here you have Hillary Clinton and Mitt Romney both saying he must release his returns. I'm not sure that conventional wisdom is right. I think the Trump coalition, if he's going to build a majority coalition, looks at the carping of politicians on both parties. Trump is the outsider running up the middle. I'm not sure that criticism is going to hurt him.
I think you meant the critics of Trump and not the critics of Romney from the left and right. And you may be right, but I will just say, look, this is our job. You know, the people that make a nominee pay the price when they, I know the bell's gone off, but you know, when they decide to divert from what is standard practice and what is standard practice for a good reason. We must be the ones who hold his feet to the fire on this and not let him continue to prevaricate about this and not let him talk about the audit. As Romney points out, the audit has nothing to do with this. The guy should release his taxes, and we should keep forcing him and pushing him to do that until he finally does. All right. Every day, we learn a little bit more about how Donald Trump's general election campaign is likely to operate. In the past 24 hours, Trump has done a handful of interviews with newspapers and TV outlets, and one thing we now know is that the presumptive GOP nominee does not plan to invest in the kind of sophisticated voter data operation that Barack Obama and other candidates at the Senate, gubernatorial, and certainly the presidential level, Mitt Romney tried to do it too, over the course of the last couple of presidential election campaign cycles. Trump told the Associated Press that, quote, "I've always felt it was overrated," meaning Obama's. He said Obama got the votes much more so than his data processing machine, meaning Obama himself, the person, the candidate. And then Trump went on and said, "I think the same is true with me," end quote. Instead, Trump says he's going to rely on the buzz that's generated by his massive, unpredictable campaign rallies, those rallies that got him so far. He told the New York Times, quote, "In a Broadway theater, the absolute best is called word of mouth. If people love a Broadway show, it's better than if you write a good review. Word of mouth is the number one thing, and the word of mouth at my rallies is like, you've got to go see it. And you know, one person goes and they talk about it to 20 people," end quote. So, Mark, here's the real question. Is Donald Trump a mad genius when it comes to this, or is he just plain mad?
Well, look, it's not an either or choice. If you were a smart campaign, you'd do both. You'd have big rallies and the excitement that Trump's personality has generated amongst people who've been for him so far. You'd also have a grand operation. I'm not sure the Trump campaign could build the kind of data-driven national thing they need to build. I think the RNC has done some of that. Some of the state parties have. I think Trump is right to continue to emphasize the reality that if he's going to win, it's going to be with a different kind of campaign. But man, if he loses a close race and the Clinton people are able to build the kind of thing they've been trying to build, it's going to potentially cost Republicans the White House.
I think you are in the vicinity of the truth on this, I think, in the sense that I think he's making a virtue out of necessity here. The reality is, given all the challenges that he faces, there's no way he could build Barack Obama's data machine, which was the most sophisticated thing that anybody's ever done in the history of politics. And so he's essentially trying to, as they say, make a virtue out of necessity, say, no, I'm going to do it a different way. You know, just because there's no way he's ever going to get there, given, again, all of his other challenges. But look, he will be at a pronounced disadvantage without that kind of data operation. When it comes to targeted states, targeting important demographics, targeting important groups of voters, almost door by door, as a modern presidential campaign will do, that will just leave him in another way disadvantaged against Hillary Clinton if he doesn't have that, and he won't.
And look, if you go to single women and Hispanics, which you and I talk about all the time, where he's got to improve his standing, those voters need to be targeted. They need to find those people and find issues where they have common ground.
Right.
And if you're not targeting, you're never going to find them, and you can't reach them in a mass way.
You got to target them, and then you got to turn them out. And those are both things that data is really key to. And again, I think Trump's going to be way behind on this, however he spins it. All right, so coming up, is Hillary Clinton winning the argument that a losing streak won't hurt her campaign? We're going to talk about that after these words from our sponsors. Last night, Bernie Sanders clobbered Hillary Clinton in the West Virginia Democratic primary, winning that state 51 to 35, 35%. But even before the polls closed, anticipating defeat, Clinton's campaign manager, Robbie Mook, and that's Mook like book, sent out an email to the Clinton campaign's donors, and that was obtained by Bloomberg Politics. And the email reassured them that there is practically nothing at this point that could stop Hillary Clinton from winning the Democratic nomination. It said, quote, although a number of upcoming primary contests in May structurally favor Bernie Sanders, their outcomes will not change the trajectory of the primary. Even if Senator Sanders wins each of the remaining 9 states by 30 points, Hillary Clinton will still have earned the majority of pledged delegates and popular vote, end quote. So, Mark, we have said, I believe correctly for a while, that Clinton can fight a two-front war. But did West Virginia last night change the reality of what a possible losing streak in this next month can do and what it will mean to and for Hillary Clinton?
You know, I think that it doesn't change it fundamentally right now, but if she continues to lose contests and lose them badly, if the exit polls continue to include data that are not helpful in framing her support for the general election, you know, it's past time when the campaign can say structurally that's a bad state for her. She's a front runner. She's, by almost every account, the certain nominee, and yet she got whopped in a state she beat Barack Obama in badly 8 years ago. So that wasn't a great night for her symbolically, but I don't think it's any big problem as long as she gets a circuit breaker going here and wins decently, at least in California and New Jersey in June.
Yeah, I think in the end that it probably doesn't matter that much. But there are a couple ways in which I think it matters. One of which is that she is clearly, as we've seen now on health care, getting pulled to the left. It's not the first time it's happened, but she's getting pulled to the left by the Sanders challenge. And as he continues to have strength, she continues to feel that tug. And the other thing, of course, is that set in contrast with these polls that show Trump doing well against her in some battleground states, it does heighten Sanders' determination to stay in, his argument for why he should fight all the way to the convention and hang around longer. It'd be a lot better for her to just put this thing away from her point of view, just shut it down, win some contests, and tell him to stop and go on and claim this nomination.
Yep, I agree. All right, it's time again to start talking about Hillary Clinton's damn emails. The FBI's investigation into Clinton's handling of classified materials has made some more headlines this week. On Monday, the State Department said it was having some trouble finding emails from the information technology staffer who set up Clinton's home server. Yesterday, news that longtime Clinton aide Cheryl Mills abruptly left an FBI interview after investigators asked about a topic that the Department of Justice had reportedly agreed would be off limits. And a New York Times story posted today said that the FBI investigation is expected to be wrapped up in the next month. Also today, Sidney Blumenthal, the longtime Clinton ally and a frequent user of emails, defended the former Secretary of State during an interview on the cable news network.
My understanding is that this is a security review. It's certainly not a criminal investigation.
But it is an investigation.
It's an inquiry into whether or not anyone intentionally put classified information where it shouldn't be. I'm sure that the Department of Justice is not a political investigation at all, and that it wants to resolve this as quickly as possible. And when they do, they'll issue a statement.
So that phrase, security inquiry or security review, has been used not just by Blumenthal, but by a lot of the Clinton campaign officials to talk about the investigation. The head of the FBI, James Comey, is now saying he's not even familiar with that term. So, John, knitting all these strands together, where do you think stands now with Hillary Clinton and her darn emails?
Email. First of all, I'd like to say seeing Sidney Blumenthal on television is giving me like a heavy-duty, like 1990s LSD flashback. I think that this is very quickly, Mark, heading into the territory where the Clinton email scandal is going to be like Benghazi. And I know I'm going to make a lot of people crazy by saying that, but this is going to be something that people on the right who are never going to vote for Hillary Clinton anyway are going to seize on. They're always going to claim that there was something there. They're always going to claim the investigation was never really complete. No matter where we end up, there are people who are going to think that she is, as Trump calls her, crooked Hillary, and that for most voters, it's not going to matter when it comes down to what happens in this fall campaign.
Most people I've talked to of late about the investigation who've got at least a partial window into it are confident that she will not be charged with a crime,
right,
that probably no one will be charged with a crime.
Right.
There may not even be a grand jury, but that the investigation, what's dangerous potentially is either the investigation leading somewhere else beyond the email server, or perhaps FBI agents leaking things about the investigation that don't amount to crimes but political problems. But that would, of course, fall far short of what the Republicans who are banking on this to change the election are counting on.
Right. There you go. Coming up, what a Trump or Clinton administration would mean for the world as we know it. David Sanger, the great David Sanger from the New York Times joins us right after this. This morning, Mark and I were both in Washington for the Pete Peterson Foundation's annual Fiscal Summit, where we hosted a discussion with South Carolina Senator and former presidential candidate Lindsey Graham. Graham has been one of Donald Trump's toughest critics for months now, but today he actually said some not 100% mean things about the Donald. It's not to say that he laid off totally. There are a few clips we'll play for you. Let's start off with Graham warming to Trump on a very specific issue, which would be raising the minimum wage.
I think Trump's actually onto something in terms of broadening the appeal of the Republican Party. Raising the minimum wage, I think, would be bad for the economy right now because it's pretty shaky. Hard to do business. There's a lot of cost to doing business. You probably knock people out of being hired. But the concept of raising the minimum wage, I would put on the table if it was part of a bigger deal. I would tell any Democrat that if you help get to yes on Simpson Bowles, I'd agree to raise the minimum wage in a logical way, in a rational way. So I think Donald's onto something here, talking about the minimum wage differently. I think he's onto something saying that you should pay ordinary income versus capital gains rates on some of these hedge funds. The goal for the Republicans is to say, I'm for the working man, not just the rich man, rich woman, working woman. That's sort of the goal. That's sort of where we're stuck. And I think he's instinctively onto something, trying to broaden the party's appeal to working folks by putting on the table things that we normally say no to.
Now, those may be the nicest words you've ever used about Donald Trump, at least in my memory.
Yeah, and you got a long memory.
Those are the nicest words I think I've ever heard him use. Mark, what do you think about that, about Lindsey Graham softening to Donald Trump, at least on this one issue?
I think it's a really big leading indicator of a guy who, like a lot of people in the Republican Party, as I said earlier in the show, is just dealing with the reality. This is our nominee. If he wins, let's have him win the right way and govern the right way. And I think Graham is looking for opportunities now, based on his conversation with us today, to identify areas where he agrees with Trump.
Well, yes, and I also think that, look, I think Lindsey Graham, there are not many Republicans who are as acute as Lindsey Graham on this point, which is that he understands that, in fact, raising the minimum wage is a political winner, and more Republicans would be smart if they embraced it.
Yep. All right. Graham was, however, notably more pointed when he was talking about Trump's standing with Hispanic voters.
What's more dangerous to the future of your party, Donald Trump winning or Donald Trump losing?
It depends on how he loses and depends what he did if he won. The bottom line is the demographic problems we have in 2012, he's made worse. So we did an analysis of the 2012 campaign. How did we lose when we thought we'd win? How did Obama win when every indicator was he should lose demographically? We got 27% of the Hispanic vote. We're really sucking wind with young women, particularly young white women. And what happened? So when you asked Hispanics, what don't you like about the Republican Party? It's not conservatism. It's just this harshness, illogical, hateful, impractical solution to immigration. So Romney went to self-deportation. If you told me in 2013 that by 2016 we'd be running on forced deportation and that Megyn Kelly was a bimbo, we got problems. I hope he adjusts. I mean, to the Hispanic community, I get it why you don't like us. I mean, who's going to vote for somebody who's going to deport their grandmother? I don't give a crap about what your financial plan is or Simpson Bowl is if you're going to deport my grandmother.
John, I think this is the area that Paul Ryan will almost certainly raise as well, if not tomorrow along the way. They must change Trump's tone, they believe, to have a fighting chance to win the general election and to not set the party back in its image amongst non-white voters, including and especially Hispanic voters.
Lindsey Graham's been on this issue for a really long time, Mark, as you know, and I think he is mortified by the turn that the party has taken, as he said there. And I agree with you. I think they will be trying to press Trump. I'm not sure that damage is fixable, though, when it comes to Hispanic voters, given some of the things that Trump has said and the tone he's taken. Forced deportation, which is still Trump's policy posture on this, even though he says some could come back, is really a huge political killer for the Republican Party if that is the posture of its party's nominee. So let me move on. Let's look at one more piece of tape here. We were surprised, I would say, that Lindsey Graham took a page from Donald Trump's own playbook this morning and gave him a nickname of Graham's own.
If you took the party labels off the two presidential candidates and just looked at them and their records and what they seem to be espousing, which one do you think would be more likely to bring about more robust economic growth as president?
I think Donald Trump would think outside the box and be open to a lot of ideas, maybe too many. Hillary Clinton is more of a traditional politician. I think what Trump has going for him is the idea of looking at old problems anew. To talk about the minimum wage being on the table, talk about taxing people at higher rates in the hedge fund world, something that most Republicans would be reluctant to talk about. So I think the energy he's brought to the table about taking the system and turning it upside down probably fits the moment. Here's what I think. Crazy loses to crooked. Crooked Hillary is going to beat crazy Donald. If he's new and different, I think he could win. New and different is different than being crazy. Does that make sense? So that's his challenge, I think, is to show that he's capable of handling the stress that comes with the job. And her challenge, I think, is to show that she's got leadership skills.
So, Mark, the formulation that crooked Hillary beats crazy Donald, and then, there's a possibility that Trump can change himself from crazy Donald to new and different Donald. That's pretty pithy. I think there's some wisdom in it, but the question is whether Donald Trump can actually see it as clearly as Lindsey Graham does.
Yeah, I agree with that. But, there's another interesting thing here as we put this in the context of the first thing we talked about, which is Graham talking differently. Lindsey Graham spent as much time as any Republican I know over the last few months trying to strategize, was there a way to stop Donald Trump from being the nominee? He has now switched his political mind and his political thinking to, how can Trump win? How can Trump win in a way that will be good for the Republican Party and the country? That is the shift, apparent shift at least, of one man, but not an insignificant player in the party, both as an actor, again, who was dead set against Trump, but is also representative of, again, what I think a lot of Republicans are doing. He may not be our choice, but he's our nominee.
Right. And, I think, we talked to him for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes today in toto, and it was interesting. He said some very critical things. He also said some things that as we've shown, that were not so critical. It's obvious, again, his tone is really 180 degrees away from where it was unrelentingly harsh just a few months ago. All right. Our thanks to Lindsey Graham for sitting with us this morning. We'll be right back with the New York Times newsman, David Sanger, after this.
Joining us now, New York Times national security correspondent David Sanger, who is the paper's former Tokyo bureau chief and a longtime chronicler of the North Korea nuclear program. So, David, we're going to talk the two big stories in Asia. First, President Obama's trip later this month to Hiroshima. Most Americans will say, what does that mean, even if they know what happened in Hiroshima? What is the symbolic importance for Americans and for Japanese of this visit?
Well, it's fascinating because there are such different expectations on both sides. Americans don't usually think that much about Hiroshima, except a generation like my father's generation. My father was a fighter director on a destroyer that was at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and their next invasion was Honshu. And the bomb, of course, is viewed by his generation as something that saved tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of American lives. In Hiroshima, the view is entirely different, that they were walking around and suddenly out of the sky drops this device that kills 100,000 people, more after the radiation between Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that it was an unnecessary, brutal use of a new weapon. And so the president's going to have to navigate the minefield of these two completely different narratives. The White House says he's not going to make an apology, and yet at the same time, he's got to use this to sort of further what he talked about in the 2008 campaign, his vision of a world without nuclear weapons, something that many of his critics, including on the left, have argued he has not made very much progress to and may have taken a few steps back.
So the big message he wants to send is not that using nuclear weapons against the Japanese was wrong, but rather we need to show the horrible human toll and that they should never be used again. And that's a message, presumably, that plays in both countries?
It is, but it's very difficult for him here because there will be many from veterans groups and many on the right who say this is sort of a continuation of an Obama apology tour. There will be many in Japan who will view the absence of an apology as a problem. So it's going to be, even for a man of the phenomenal rhetorical skills of Barack Obama, this is going to be a really hard speech to write.
Yep.
So, David, you mentioned President Obama's nuclear non-proliferation objectives. One area in which it seems as though his failed notably, according to a story you published last week, is in North Korea, where it seems, according to your story, which I think is incredibly important, it seems that the U.S. and South Korea have now concluded, yes, North Korea has the capacity to launch nuclear weapons, short-range, medium-range nuclear weapons. Just tell us about this has been a long time coming. Tell us about the significance of this moment.
Sure. So, John, if you think that the big success for Obama was the Iran nuclear agreement, he kept Iran from, at least for the next 10 to 15 years, we think, from gathering the material for a nuclear weapon and had them ship a lot out. The great failure would be North Korea. But it was a failure that had many, many fathers, going back to George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, all of whom viewed this as too complex to go deal with because the North Koreans have always had the capacity with conventional weapons to attack Seoul and basically wreak great damage for 24 hours before a war that they would ultimately lose. And the result is, as you kick things down the can, eventually the North Koreans gain more and more capability. And what our story said, and it's interesting you haven't heard a word of dissent from the intelligence community, the White House, has been that they now have the capacity to put that weapon on a short-range missile, which could hit American troops in South Korea or Japan, and of course the Japanese islands and the South Koreans. You've heard that downplayed to some degree by the Japanese and the South Koreans, who don't want to panic their populations, understandably.
So, David, if that story, as you say, there's been no dissent, if your story is correct, it would seem that North Korean proliferation would be right at the front of any presidential candidate's foreign policy agenda as they get ready to run for president in this fall term. So talk about Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And do they have stances on non-proliferation? Are they strong stances? Do they talk about this particular threat?
Well, Mr. Trump, in his interview with Maggie Haberman and with me a month and a half ago, talked about pulling back from Japan and South Korea, pulling the American troops back, if those two countries didn't make a greater contribution to their own defense. So we'll set aside for the fact that Japan probably pays more on a percentage basis than any other country for the presence of Americans, about $2 billion a year. But if he did that and Japan and South Korea ended up going nuclear, which he said to me he had no particular problem with, you could see this arms race sort of taking off. I'm not sure that's a fully thought out position yet. It was interesting when he gave his foreign policy speech a few weeks ago after our interview, he did not repeat that position about Japan and South Korea. We have not heard much from him on North Korea other than the threat that if they ever used a weapon, they would really come to regret it. Lots of people have said that. For Secretary Clinton, I think the hard part is the fundamental decision to focus on Iran and try what they called strategic patience with the North Koreans, which clearly failed. Now, she was very tuned into the North Korea issue, even as a senator. I remember talking to her many times after hearings on North Korea. She was pretty focused on it. But as Secretary of State, I have to say she was part of an administration that decided to basically push the issue off while they were dealing with a treaty with Russia and with the Iran issue.
New York Times' David Singer. David, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Coming up next, a Republican, a Democrat, and Bloomberg's Margaret Talev walk into a TV studio. You won't believe what happens next. If you're watching us here in Washington, D.C., you can now listen to us on the radio at Bloomberg 99.1 FM. We'll be right back. yourself confused about the upcoming general election? Do you have questions about candidates in this race? Have you been injured in any way by Donald Trump's insults? If any of these things apply to you, you're in luck. Ginsberg and Dunn may sound like the name of a prestigious law firm, but it happens to be the names of our next two guests. Democratic strategist Anita Dunn, Republican Ben Ginsberg join us here, and my colleague Margaret Talev also on board. Margaret.
Thank you, Mark. Well, we are an esteemed company and so much to talk about. Can we start with Donald Trump?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Can he get away with not releasing his tax returns? I mean, it's a simple political question. I know there may be an IRS component to it. He says he's being audited right now. But he said a couple of different things. One is when the audit is over, at that point he might be willing to do it. The other is he appeared to have told the Associated Press not until after their November election. Now he's saying that's not what I said. I said after the audit. What kind of new ground would it break, and how big a deal would it be?
Oh, look, I think that tax returns are one of those wonderful things that the press likes a lot. Having worked for a candidate who felt it was personally intrusive, tried to delay it a lot, it builds up the pressure for when the taxes eventually do come out. And you do have to kind of release them as part of the due diligence that voters are going to do before an election.
Meaning you think he has to release them?
Yeah, and I think he probably will on his timetable.
And Margaret, if you recall his release of his so-called medical records, which consisted of a letter from a doctor that sounded suspiciously like a first cousin of Donald Trump because he kept talking about the greatest health ever, I think that you might see a truncated release of those returns at some appropriate time. But Donald Trump doesn't actually play by anybody else's rules, so he may very well decide that he doesn't have to do this, and we'll see how the voters feel about this.
Mitt Romney today says it would be disqualifying for him not to do that. And
well, he should know.
Easy.
I can hear Hillary Clinton today, though, talking to New Jersey, saying she and her husband had to release their returns for 33 years. I could almost see the steam rising out of her ears. But she tried to imagine, what if he doesn't have to and I always had to?
Her not releasing her speeches is becoming the equivalent, at least rhetorically in this campaign, with not doing tax returns. We can argue about the substantive values of the two.
Do you think it's the equivalent?
Because this is the keeping of secrets by candidates when the media and political opponents believe information should come out.
If you did a public opinion poll, and believe me, people will start, you think the American public will demand this?
Demand that he release his tax returns?
If we ask that question?
I think if you ask the question in a certain way, the American public would agree that he should do it. But is it a voting issue is a better question. For some candidates, particularly candidates like former Governor Romney, it was an issue that became damaging because of the suspicion that he hadn't paid any taxes. Donald Trump, who loves to talk about how he's gamed the system and how he uses all the rules in his favor, doesn't exactly have the same problems there. So, again, I feel that you can probably get that answer from a poll. It's not clear to me yet that it is, and I think we have a way to go in this campaign before it becomes an issue that hurts him. So.
Speaking of issues that could or might not hurt candidates, let's talk about where the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails is going. Politically, I guess, first, and maybe substantively also. Jim Comey, the FBI director, today talking to reporters saying that he is staying close to the investigation personally to make sure that it's being handled the right way. And Brian Fallon, Clinton's spokesman, saying that the candidate herself has not been asked to come in to talk with investigators yet, but aides, of course, are being interviewed. Where do you see this going, and at this point, do you think that it is going to have any impact on the conventions or the nominating process?
Sure. I think the absence of a decision on this, something that's dragged out for more than a year, is a shadow over the campaign. Not unlike the argument you were making about Donald Trump's taxes. This is a large piece of information which there's a demand to know about that stays silent. That she hasn't been asked to come in yet just kind of confirms that she's the target of the investigation and the last person to be interviewed, which builds the suspense even more.
Is she the target of the investigation?
Well, I don't know that, and actually Ben Ginsberg doesn't know that either, and the people who know that aren't talking. But I think it's fair to say that in the interest of this political process and in the interest of the American people, clearly everyone hasn't, a belief this should get wrapped up one way or another quickly. And I think that Director Comey made it very clear that he's moving as expeditiously as possible because you don't want to have this happen post-conventions. You want to go ahead, whatever the disposition is. let people know what it is.
I mean, Mark, do you see Bernie Sanders as kind of using this to his effect in these closing weeks with the contest?
There'd have to be, I think, a concrete public thing out of the investigation that he could latch onto and warn voters about. I think we're a million miles away from that.
I mean, he's made it very clear what his campaign is about and how he's going to wage this campaign, which is on his issues around the direction of the Democratic Party and the nation generally, on issues of inequality, power, how power is exercised, who it gets exercised for, who it gets exercised by.
But he has shifted to some extent to talk about electability. That has been one of his biggest talking points over the last few weeks. And if something happened that suggested she'd have trouble winning a general election, that crooked Hillary was not just Donald Trump's view, but the Justice Department's view, I think he'd talk about it.
If you were scripting out this convention, you would probably not recommend, let's add to the suspense around the convention by letting the emails hang out there.
Well, I definitely am in the camp that thinks expeditiously is a good thing here, yes.
Latest polling, and of course, national polls, battleground polls, it's May, who cares anyways?
It's May.
But, okay. 3 battleground polls out yesterday, 1 national online, albeit poll out today, all make this national race, if it is in fact between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, look awfully close. How much stock do you put in that? And even if you'd say not that much, what sort of warning sign do you see for her in this? I mean, the Democrats have been talking as though he's a million miles behind her. Is he?
Well, yeah, let me. First of all, it's May. There's a whole campaign to be run here. And I think that one set of polls, okay, that could or could not be outliers that are taken in May shouldn't have too much read into them. But is this a closely divided country? Yes. Are these races always close? Yes. Is this one likely to be closer than conventional wisdom 2 weeks ago held it was going to be? Always was going to be. Republicans do tend to solidify. Democrats will solidify. And there will be a small group of voters who decide the election, which is kind of the way it usually goes. And it happens in the fall.
You are asking the question, albeit in May, tells you that these polls have shifted the perception of the race, that the Democrats were trying very, very hard to make the argument that the race was out of control, that there was a huge gap between the candidates, that it was going to lead to all the down-ballot disasters of Republicans losing the House and the Senate. If nothing else, these polls have shifted that discussion.
But I just have to jump in here because the reality is that what you're seeing in swing states is you are seeing extremely close Senate races. As a matter of fact, those same Quinnipiac polls show the incumbents in Ohio and Pennsylvania, both in dead heats, actually 1 point behind their challengers at a very early stage, and in the low 40s, which is a bad thing for Republican incumbents. And when you talk anecdotally with people who are doing polling in House races, you are seeing very different patterns than what you've seen in the last 8 years. So I think that both realities can be true, but it's a closely divided country.
I'd be remiss if I didn't get this one in under the wire. A fundraising letter from the Sanders campaign today from Jeff Weaver, the campaign manager. We're going to have a contested convention where the Democratic Party must decide if they want the candidate with the momentum, who's the best positioned to beat Trump, or if they're willing to roll the dice and court disaster simply to protect the status quo for the political and financial establishment of this country. Is that fair game for a campaign manager in the closing weeks of a contest, or is that over the top?
Not over the top. I mean, all I can say is that it is a tremendous relief to Republicans to have our race resolved and to have the Democrats fighting in this particular way, talking about contested conventions and who wants the momentum.
You know, Margaret, I have heard a sigh of relief from the Republican Party, from sea to shining sea, that their nomination has been resolved in the way it's been resolved behind the nominee. So I'm not quite sure I would buy that. But you know, their theory of the case is they have to shake this thing loose somehow, and in particular start shaking superdelegates loose. And the fear tactic, the she can't win tactic, you know, is one that they think appeals most to superdelegates. So of course they're going to go down this road.
Okay, Ben, Margaret, thank you both, and Anita, thank you. Always a pleasure. All right, coming up, a new rant from ACN's Will McElvoy. We'll be right back.
A couple days ago, a friend of the show, Jeff Daniels, the Tony Award-nominated star of Blackbird on Broadway, stopped by this set for a little interview. Daniels, of course, was previously the star of many things, including HBO's The Newsroom, in which he played cable anchor Will McAvoy. Even if you haven't seen that show, you have probably seen the most famous scene from its very first episode, the moment when McAvoy launches into an impromptu tirade about whether America is really the greatest country in the world. We asked Jeff if he'd be willing to reprise that scene in the context of the 2016 presidential race. But before we show you that reprisal, let's take a quick look at the original to refresh your memory.
Can you say in one sentence or less what, you know what I mean. Can you say why America is the greatest country in the world?
The New York Jets.
No, I'm going to hold you to an answer on that. What makes America the greatest country in the world? I'm not letting you go back to the airport without answering the question. Why is America
Not the greatest country in the world, Professor. That's my answer.
Okay, so that's how it starts. Now, let's take a look at our special updated version, scripted by the great Matt Negrin and directed by the even greater house auteur here, Griffin Hammond.
All right, so can you say in one sentence or less, all right, you know what I mean. Can you say why Donald Trump is the best case scenario for Hillary Clinton?
Well, I think for the first time in election history, I think her opponent might donate to her campaign.
No. I'm going to hold you an answer on that. What makes Donald Trump the best case scenario for Hillary Clinton? Jeff, I'm not going to let you go back to the airport without giving me an actual answer on this question. What makes Donald...
Because he's not the best case scenario, John. That's my answer. Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump is a fact-bending loose cannon who alienates mainstream voters with everything he says, but he gets constant media attention for free. It won't be a day from now until November when Trump isn't on every TV channel. And with a straight face, you're going to tell me that electing a woman is unprecedented? Germany elected a female chancellor. Brazil elected a female president. Denmark, Poland, Korea, Argentina, Norway, Liberia, Cyprus are run by women. So 22 sovereign states in the world have already beat us on this.
All right, okay, fine.
Okay, game change guy. Just in case you accidentally find yourself writing a third book, there's some things that you should know. And one of them is there's absolutely no evidence to support the statement that Trump is the best case scenario for Hillary Clinton. 38% of the people gave her a favorable rating. 30% of the people say that she's honest and trustworthy. And just 22% of Democrats say they're enthusiastic about her being the nominee. Sure, she beats Trump in some categories, like millennials who don't even show up to vote. She also leads in the number of messages deleted on her personal email server, but that aside. So when you ask what makes Trump the best case scenario for Hillary, I don't know what the f*** you're talking about. His tiny hands?
And we'll be right back.
Our thanks again to Jeff Daniels. One thing John and I didn't get a chance to talk about today is Donald Trump and his new sparring partner, for whom he has a new nickname. That is the person he now calls Goofy Elizabeth Warren. Trump and Warren engaging again on Twitter, and Trump's decided to call her Goofy. John, what does Donald Trump get out of fighting with Elizabeth Warren?
I don't get it, man. I don't really get the nickname, and I don't really get the fight. I mean, Trump's had some great nicknames that have really stuck to people, but I don't think people think that the problem with Elizabeth Warren, even those who don't like her, think that she's goofy. For a little while, I like to call her the Indian, you know? That was a little bit too inside baseball. I don't think Trump's found the real hook here yet.
He may not have a real hook, but I think fighting with Elizabeth Warren is great for him, because if there's anybody who the right hates more than Elizabeth Warren, I don't really know who it is. A great symbolic politics for him to kind of continue to do what he needs to do now more than anything else, which is consolidate his base.
Yeah.
And he's going to pay no price for fighting with her, because he's not going to win over any Elizabeth Warren supporters.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's okay for him. I have to say, I think it's probably good for her, too. She seems to enjoy this, probably guaranteeing her reelection if she gets into a big fight with Donald Trump, given the people who love her in Massachusetts. All right, it's time for y'all to head over to BloombergPolitics.com right now to check out our latest story from Jennifer Jacobs and Kevin Cirilli outlining Team Trump's power struggle over picking a running mate. Coming up on Bloomberg TV, we have Emily Chang speaking to the president of MIT. That'll be great. Until tomorrow, me and Mark Halperin, him in Washington, me in New York, we're with you until right about now when we say sayonara.